Leslie Wallach, National Association of Regional Councils. Thank you for joining us today. We're so pleased to have you. We're here today just to give you a brief recap of the elections that from last week and talk a little bit about what is left outstanding in terms of the elections and the final count. We also wanted to give you an intro to what we expect for the rest of this year and the 116th Congress. So we're pleased to have you join us. I want you to know that today's webinar is being recorded. It will be available later today on our website. With that, I want to let you know that NARC staff is here following these issues and others. We're available to help. We're going to do a quick intro to the issues that we see as important for the coming year, but you should know that NARC staff are always here to help you with these issues and other issues that come up during the year. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Zimmerman, our Deputy Director and Transportation Director, to talk a little bit about one of the important issues for the 116th Congress. Eric?
Thanks, Leslie. Welcome all. I certainly pleased to have everybody on the call today. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time going over what we expect for the rest of this year. Spend the bulk of the time talking a little bit about the election and some of the changes that we expect from that, and some of the issues that we expect to come out, and what sort of how that feeds into what we're anticipating for next year. I would say that for the rest of this Congress, at least as far as transportation and infrastructure goes, the two major things that we're tracking that are of the greatest interest would first of all be the appropriations process. This applies to other bills as well, as there are 7 bills outstanding, including the transportation funding bill. As folks are likely aware, the last year's appropriations bill and this year's expected bill do contain some important funding provisions, including full funding of the FAST Act, increased funding for the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, and some other areas that are fully funded as well. And as far as the understanding goes right now, there does seem to be a pretty broad agreement that there will not be any kind of a government shutdown, that they're not intending to push the envelope on timing and getting to final bills. And if that is the case, then we can expect that the bills that we saw introduced and sort of ready to roll before the election are the same bills they're going to roll with after the election. And that includes transportation, that includes an even more significant increase for Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. And so I think all in all, if that bill does get finalized here in the coming weeks, then there's, I think, quite a bit to be happy about in that piece of legislation. The other issue for the remainder of this Congress that remains a possibility is the AV START bill that is currently in the Senate. The House earlier this year unanimously passed its own automated vehicle legislation. The Senate has been unable to do so for a number of reasons, including concerns over the way that the bill preempts local authority in this area. We're kind of waiting to see where that's going to go. There's some optimism being expressed by members, as it has been all along, that a bill will get done this year. But I think there seems to be a prevailing thought that, in fact, that's going to get held over, and that we'll have to take up this battle again in the new Congress. Honestly, from where we sit, I think we would prefer that. I think there are some concerning provisions, especially around preemption, that might be better worked out by some new legislation. Reconsidering this, especially with new leadership in the House, there might be some better outcomes that we can achieve if the bill is held over. So with that, let me talk a little bit about the election and how it affects some of the issues that we are tracking. I guess some of the overarching questions that were raised by the results from last week, as folks know, I'm sure that the results are still coming in, but we do have a pretty good sense of where things are going to fall out. and that is, are we going to expect bipartisanship here in the next year or perhaps 6 months, or are we going to be looking at more gridlock? And if there is bipartisanship, could infrastructure be one of those bipartisan areas of agreement? The second question would be, how much does oversight and the Democrats' desire and expressed intention to do additional oversight, how will that interfere with any potential for policy agreement? And then the policy areas that we're watching, and I'll touch upon this as I go through some of the changes that have occurred as a result of the election, include an infrastructure package, the potential for that, automated vehicles, depending on what happens this year with AV START and an agreement there, and then funding sources for transportation. So I'll touch upon those as I go through. Starting with some of the leadership and committee structures, Nancy Pelosi on election night, if folks heard, indicated that in her victory speech that one of her themes is build, build, build. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, after speaking to Pelosi on election night, said he's ready to work with the new House Democratic majority to fund infrastructure. And so we're hearing the right words, at least from the outset, from the top, on the potential for something happening in the new Congress. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee generally is going to see the return of about 4/5 of the committee. Right now, there have been 11 members will not be returning. It could be 12, depending on what happens with the Woodall race. I think the most interesting aspect there, in addition to the leadership change, which I'll discuss in a moment, is that a number of senior Republicans on the House T&I committee, either through retirement or through having lost their election, will not be returning in the new Congress. That includes Chairman Schuster, Representative Jeff Denham, who was going to vie to be the chairman or the ranking on the committee. He also lost. John Duncan, Frank Lobiondo, Lou Barletta, Mark Sanford are all gone, and there's still the question. The Rob Woodall race in Georgia is still outstanding. So what we're going to see is that 6 or 7 of the most senior 16 Republicans on the committee, and 10 Republicans overall, are going to change, with 2 Democrats also changing as well. The chairmanship for the committee will go to Peter DeFazio. And just a few observations about his leadership. He has been somewhat creative in the past, or at least pushed on some ideas for increasing funding for infrastructure and transportation. He supports a gas tax increase and indexing it. He's got a bill called a Penny for Progress, a bill interestingly also supported by Freedom Caucus member Thomas Massey, also on T&I committee. So that might be something to look for. And in addition, Oregon, as folks I'm sure know, is a leader in the mileage-based user fee concept for funding transportation. DeFazio has said that this could play a role in the 2020 authorization, but separately is also called, the reliance or the thinking about a mileage-based user fee as an artful dodge relative to increasing the gas tax. So he sees the need to increase gas tax in the short term in order to get us to some sort of VMT or mileage-based user fee system in the future. He's also expressed interest in more oversight, including of DOT. The one area would be the large transit grants, the New Starts projects that have not been funded despite having been largely approved, and has actually discussed that in relation to the gateway projects in New York. In addition, and one that may actually be more impactful in terms of how it impacts the ability to get something done in the next Congress, is that committee also has oversight over the GSA, General Services Administration. And so that would be an issue surrounding the Trump Hotel and the decision not to construct or not to replace the FBI bill, to rebuild the FBI in place instead of moving the FBI headquarters from its current downtown DC location to a suburb. And in addition to that, Mr. DeFazio himself stated directly that the Democrats intend to pursue the president's tax returns within their first week in power. So that single point of information I think is potentially hugely impactful. This would be going after the administration at a place of probably greatest pain for the president, and I think could have dramatic consequences on the ability of getting anything done here in the next Congress. On the Republican side, Sam Graves appears will be the ranking member. He had been actively campaigning to be chairman, therefore actively campaigning to be ranking member. No campaign necessary because his primary opponent in that was Jeff Denham, who lost his reelection. Mr. Graves is generally opposed to a gas tax increase, has said it's time to shift to another model more quickly than we have been, but does not support increasing the gas tax as a bridge to get us there. I'll also note Eleanor Holmes Norton, the representative from DC, will likely be the next chair of the Surface Transportation Subcommittee of T&I. So moving on to the Senate EPW Committee, Mr. John Barrasso will keep the gavel there, and Tom Carper will remain ranking member. Barrasso, I think, at least in some of his initial comments, seems to be looking a little bit more ahead to reauthorization than he is to necessarily an infrastructure package, though obviously if something were going to move, that would change. But Mr. Barrasso has not been chairman for a reauthorization, so I think that's where some of his attention is going. He also introduced a bill earlier this year that would repeal the electric vehicle tax credit. So that's kind of an interesting battle that may be waged there. And he himself also opposes increasing fuel taxes. Mr. Carper thinks that the challenge facing this Congress is finding a bridge between gas tax and VMT fee, and that in his view, the bridge does not necessarily require a gas tax increase. And so that'll remain interesting to see what kind of ideas he might generate or proposals he might generate in that direction. So moving on to the Commerce Committee, the chair there will be Roger Wicker. Current chair is John Thune. Senator Thune is going to move up to become the majority whip, number 2 in the Senate, replacing John Cornyn. But interestingly, I did see something yesterday that Mr. Thune may slide into the subcommittee chairmanships that Mr. Wicker currently has, which would leave him still in control or with a lot to say about an automated vehicle bill in the next Congress. He's the primary author of the AV START bill in this Congress. So he will likely remain an important player in any legislation in that direction. Mr. Wicker himself also supports rural broadband and any kind of an infrastructure deal. So a topic that might be of interest to some folks on the call might see a little bit more play in the next Congress. Mr. Bill Nelson will be ranking member of that committee if he wins. Otherwise, we expect it to be Maria Cantwell, or if she stays at Energy and Natural Resources, then we expect Amy Klobuchar to be ranking member on Commerce Committee. A couple more committees I'll go through quickly. Senate Finance Committee, Orrin Hatch is retiring. Chuck Grassley is next in line for the gavel there if he gives up his seat at Judiciary. If not, we expect Mike Crapo to be the next chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and Ron Wyden is expected to remain ranking member of that committee. And then on House Ways and Means, Richard Neal will be the incoming chairman from Massachusetts. Kevin Brady will transition from chairman to ranking member. That's another interesting committee with potential huge impacts on infrastructure, because it would be out of House Ways and Means that we would see a proposal to increase the fuel tax if that were to occur. Interestingly, 10 of the 24 Republican members of that committee are not returning this Congress, so there's really going to be a pretty new slate of lawmakers that will be there. And then one additional note: Frank Pallone is the likely chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He specifically said he would be willing to revisit some of the issues surrounding automated vehicle legislation. So instead of resubmitting the bill that the House passed last year, he would be potentially interested in crafting something new going forward. So what does this mean? Are we going to see an infrastructure package? I think is the number one question on folks' minds. If that were to occur, the president would certainly have to be extremely active in selling this and making this happen. Apparently, Mr. DeFazio and the White House have spoken. And there could be the potential for some agreement there, though in my estimation, I think the oversight, the desire to conduct additional and vigorous oversight of the administration is most likely going to get in the way of any potential agreement that could occur. In addition, the funding would be a particular challenge. Mr. DeFazio himself has said that he would expect the bill would be somewhere in the $500 billion range. The administration had a $200 billion proposal last year. The Democrats themselves, I think, put out a general call on a $1 trillion package. But the simple fact is that at any of those dollar amounts, quite simply, there's been no funding source identified. The Democrats, for their part, have roundly rejected last year's proposal from the White House. And, you know, what we would really need to see is the ability to identify some new funding sources in order to make this happen. With, I think, moving into the new year, that debt and deficit become a much bigger concern and a much more vocalized challenge for folks to overcome, to try and pass something on a you know, borrowed basis as opposed to having some kind of offset or pay for. To sum that portion up, I think that the chances of an infrastructure bill may be greater in terms of a large package than anything else. I just think that the chances of something happening there are quite small, and expect that we're going to be into partisan fighting pretty quickly here in the new Congress. But you know, we will certainly have our eye on that very, very closely, obviously. A few other things that we're keeping our eye on. There's a possibility for a Ways and Means subcommittee on transportation and infrastructure. That's somewhat interesting. Again, getting to that idea that though we may not see an infrastructure bill, probably won't see a gas tax increase, that there might be an increasing opportunity within Congress to discuss some new ways to fund transportation and infrastructure going forward. And that could be a very interesting conversation and an important one, even if we don't necessarily see those changes right away. Couple final things. Earmarks are something that are always interesting. Obviously, making agreement on large infrastructure and transportation packages easier. DeFazio, for his part, has not ruled out the idea. I don't think the Democrats have ruled out the idea of potentially moving on that, though I think that also unlikely, but remains part of the conversation, certainly on Capitol Hill. And then appropriations. As we move into next year off of the current appropriations process, which had a 2-year budget deal that helped smooth passage to large increases in funding for a large number of areas, including transportation, we move into next year without such a budget deal in place, and the sequestration caps remain in place for the next 2 years. So there is really some dramatic either spending cutting that would need to occur, or a new agreement would need to be put into place in order to maintain the funding levels that we've seen for the past couple of years. So that's going to be a major issue to keep an eye on. As well, the debt limit expiry, the agreement on the debt limit will expire. So all of these bringing some of these appropriations and budget and finance issues to the fore. Again, I think making it more challenging to think that something could get done in a major infrastructure package. So that was a lot of information crammed into a fairly short delivery. I hope folks were able to get all of that. I am actually at a conference currently, so I'm going to jump off the call. So I think we're going to do questions right away on transportation and infrastructure. And then for all the other topics that are going to be covered, there'll be another opportunity for questions at the end. So if folks have any questions, I'd be happy to help with those now.
Just a reminder, if you have a question, please use the question box in your toolbox. We do have one question, Eric. Was Mr. DeFazio passed over for committee chairman in the past?
I'm trying to think. I don't believe so. But I'd have to go back and take a look. My memory says no, but I do not remember. It's been 8 years since the Democrats had the House, and I don't believe he was passed over at that point. I think he was when he came in to be ranking, he may have actually been in line to be chairman when the Democrats lost the House. But I'd have to check on that to be 100% sure.
And does sequestration ever go away?
There are 2 years left. There was a 10-year agreement. That agreement between President Obama and the Republicans lasted for 10 years, and so we do have two years left of sequestration caps.
And to clarify, the Ways and Means Subcommittee on T&I would be a new subcommittee, correct?
That is correct. I don't think it's ever existed before, is my understanding. So yes, that would be something new that would be created, and there does seem to be pretty broad support for such an idea, including among Mr. DeFazio himself as well, Mr. Blumenauer, also from Oregon.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions, but I'll give everyone one more minute. Here's one more. In your view, is it premature to proactively consider projects to advance for an infrastructure package?
I mean, it's always good to have projects that, are, to use a phrase that we're not allowed to use, shovel ready, or at least things that would be good proposals to put forward, because even if you don't use them for an infrastructure package, those are the same types of projects that would be good to demonstrate why we need reauthorization in a couple of years. So, and there very well could be a process on an infrastructure package. I should actually take the opportunity to say that just because we don't get to a final package doesn't mean that we don't see something out of one or both of the chambers in that direction. So again, another reason why having some projects ready to push to your members of Congress to demonstrate why we need investment in infrastructure would not be a bad thing.
Does DeFazio have experience or perspective on MPOs?
It's a great question. My general sense and my general observation is it's fairly limited. He does not, for example, represent Portland. He represents less populated areas within Oregon. So I think that's a very good question, something that we're going to definitely be running down and see where he falls on some of these. I know that there's already been some discussion. I have not yet directly spoken with some of his staff yet, but there has been some indication that they have been indicating some desire to take a look at some of the regulations and some of the Section 134 requirements for MPOs. So I do think chasing down his take on this is going to be very important, and I think he could have a lot to say about the structure and functionality of MPOs going forward. So it's an extremely important question that we'll certainly be pursuing here.
Hi, Eric. This is Leslie. I want to add one thing. DeFazio does represent Eugene, Oregon, which is represented by the Lane COG, and they've gotten involved, and I know they were already in discussions with him on some of the issues, including transportation. We also have been working with some of the COGs in DC that are represented by DC lobbyists, some of whom have worked very closely with DeFazio as well. Many of the Oregon representatives have been working with DeFazio on the MPO issue.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have right now. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, all. Appreciate it.
So now we'll turn it over to Neil Bomberg.
Do this. Yeah, but I can't figure out what I'm doing. Oh, I know what I did.
Hey, Neil, we hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was having difficulty finding my how to unmute myself, so I apologize. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 116th Congress and who will be in charge. You heard some of this from Eric already, but I'm going to talk more about the House and Senate leadership. In morning meetings today, both Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer were reelected to keep their posts in the next Congress beginning January 3rd. Earlier this afternoon, House Republicans selected their leadership. Kevin McCarthy was selected as House Minority Leader. Some of you may recall that Kevin McCarthy, a Republican from California, served as the Majority Leader in the previous Congress, or in the current Congress. He was up against Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, who was the former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. In that vote, McCarthy won handily, and it was his argument that prevailed. He argued that he was the most qualified to lay the groundwork to regain the majority for the Republicans in the House. Jordan told House Republicans that he was the best, in the best position to defend Trump against Democrats. Conservatives did make an aggressive push for greater control in the House. And just today, the president joined into the discussions with announcing that he supported Jim Jordan. But the election of McCarthy suggests that the House did not choose to go as far to the right as they might have had they selected Jim Jordan, who, as I mentioned, is a member of the Freedom Caucus. Current GOP whip Steve Scalise from Louisiana kept his job, and Wyoming Republican Liz Cheney, who was uncontested in her bid, is now the House GOP conference chair. And for those of you not familiar with what the conference chair does, basically she will be typically in charge of messaging and acting as a liaison between leadership and rank and file members. Now, 2 weeks remain until the House Democrats choose their leaders, and this could be the most interesting leadership election of them all. As of today, the only person who was announced as Speaker to be elected as Speaker is Nancy Pelosi of California. That may change, but experts in Washington seem to think that it is likely that any move to deny her speakership will succeed. No one has been more effective in raising money and getting Democrats elected than Nancy Pelosi, and the loyalty that brings is likely to give her the speakership. Pelosi has already been endorsed by 12 labor groups, but she is facing opposition. And just today, Representative Marcia Fudge of Ohio said that she has not ruled out anything and may decide to run for Speaker. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to jump ahead to talk a bit about the agenda for both the House Democrats and Republicans and Senate Democrats and Republicans expressed agendas at this point, some of which you've already heard from Eric, and I'll highlight that as appropriate. House Democrats, having gained control of the chamber, have announced that they will introduce 3 bills right at the start. The first will be to address healthcare costs. There are significant complaints about the ongoing rise in the costs of healthcare, and that is one thing they've committed to address. They will submit a $1 trillion federal infrastructure investment bill, and they are going to introduce an ethics and lobbying reform and voting rights bill. And as Eric mentioned, in addition, the top Democrats on House committees are prepping to launch oversight hearings and investigations of the administration and have begun the initial steps of coordinating their opening topics to avoid conflicts and overlaps across the various committees. The first legislation that is going to be introduced of the three is to restore voting rights and overturn Citizens United, as well as reforming lobbying rules and reestablishing PAYGO. For those of you who are not familiar with PAYGO or pay-as-you-go, it would require that any new funding be either offset by a decrease in existing funding somewhere or raising additional revenues. The second bill will be the healthcare bill, and that's going to be divided into two buckets, basically. As I mentioned, cost containment and reining in premiums. And the second one is lowering the costs of prescription drugs. And the third bill, the $1 trillion infrastructure spending bill, would be sold as a bill to boost jobs and wages. So those are the priorities of the House Democrats or Democratic leadership. The House Republican leadership has indicated that they will maintain many of the same agenda items that exist in the current Congress, although the likelihood of them achieving any of these goals is significantly reduced. One objective would be to cut mandatory spending by $5.4 trillion over the next decade. That would include $537 billion in cuts to Medicare and $1.5 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and other health programs. On Medicare, the budget would move towards a system, or their proposals would have Medicare move towards a system of private health insurance plans competing with one another to provide Medicare coverage for seniors. On Medicaid, the budget would impose new caps that could lead to cuts in payments to physicians and hospitals over time. In addition, and Macy will mention this, I'm sure, Republicans will continue to seek to tighten the work requirements for food stamps, and they have indicated that they would like to pass a 10% cut for middle-income households. The Senate Republicans said today that infrastructure, healthcare, and judicial appointments are on the agenda in 2019. As many of you may know, this Senate has been more successful than most in passing or ensuring that judicial nominees are approved by the Senate, with the Republicans apparently maintaining their Senate majority. It is likely that they will continue to work very hard at that as part of their effort to put more conservative judges on the courts. But they have indicated that they will address infrastructure and healthcare as well. In the case of healthcare, they'd like to address some of the aspects of the 2010 Obamacare healthcare law, especially around prescription drug prices. But that they indicated that changes to Medicare or any other of the federal health programs are very much unlikely. McConnell also said that while they would like to pass a middle-class tax cut, he's very aware of the fact that that will require bipartisan support. Senate Democrats have not said a lot, and what they have said is that they will push infrastructure legislation, healthcare legislation, and prison reform, for which there appears to be some bipartisan support. I think what's interesting here is you can see that there is general agreement around, especially around infrastructure and healthcare. The question is going to be whether they can generate a broad consensus to get them there. And that will remain to be seen. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Macy.
All right, thanks, Neil. I appreciate it and glad to have you all on today. I'll be touching on some of the things that Eric and Neil covered, but touching on a little bit more issues as well. I'd like to just take a step back for a moment and talk about some of the other non-transportation issues that may come up the rest of this current lame duck session. Eric did mention appropriations and the importance of a budget cap deal coming up for fiscal year 2020, but for fiscal year 2019, like he said, we still have 7 bills left to go, including not only transportation, but agriculture, commerce, housing and urban development, Department of State, and Justice. To avoid a partial government shutdown, they will have to either pass some or all of these bills by the deadline of December 8th, or they'll have to pass a continuing resolution which will kick the can down the road either later this year, closer to Christmas, or into the new Congress. So this process is currently being complicated by President Trump's call on Congress to fund the border wall, and it just all depends on how much of a hard line he's wanting to take on these requests. Whether or not we'll see if Congress does come together and pass any of these appropriations bills, whether or not he will reject them. There has been really good bipartisan conversations going on about border security, which is a little bit different than the border wall conversations, but hopefully, that sort of conversation will get things moving and we'll see the passage of appropriations bills before the new Congress comes in. And with that, thinking about our friends in California, I think that some disaster relief may be on the way. Senator Leahy, who's the top Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee, has already said that the Democrats are interested in passing legislation this year that'll give $720 million to wildlife relief funds in California. And because of Hurricane Florence and Michael, I think we could see hurricane relief as well. So just keep an eye out for that. It may be attached to appropriations bills or some larger vehicle of this year. Farm Bill, as most of you probably know, the Farm Bill reauthorization deadline has passed, so we are in a lapse at the moment. Conversations are continuing to go on with the Farm Bill. They had a meeting this week on the House side, but unfortunately it didn't go so well and progress hasn't been made. So time is running very quickly on whether or not they'll be able to pass this at the end of the year, and it's becoming more likely it may be pushed into next year. So keep an eye out for that as well. National Flood Insurance Program, as many of you probably have heard me say in frustration, has been kicked down the road 7 times now, and I am estimating an 8th time is on the way. Hasn't been a lot of discussion about the NFIP. There's a lot of sticking points there that are still inhibiting this going forward, so I think it may be one of those issues that come up in the new year as well. I think as Neil mentioned very briefly, criminal justice reform is really taken a turn of interest for this group, trying to pass it before the end of the year. It includes things that will reduce federal prison sentences for some nonviolent crimes, providing judges greater abilities to sidestep mandatory minimum sentences, and helping for prisoners to prepare for life after they complete their sentences. So a more comprehensive package could be seen next year, depending on whether or not the current Congress is able to pass this comprehensive reform that they're looking at right now. So jumping into priorities next year, I think Neil did a really great job covering healthcare, which became a really big hot button topic in the midterm elections. So all I'll add to that, I think, is that we could see more opioids-related bills coming next year. There was a big comprehensive package passed just a couple of months ago, I believe, but just more help, more funding may be available, more assistance for healthcare providers and treatment centers, so be on the lookout for that. The federal reorganization, as many of you may remember, earlier this year, the White House proposed a federal reorganization plan that would do many things, but particularly eliminate the CDBG program and would merge the Departments of Labor and Education. So while moving this plan forward and Congress was not successful this year, and they're not going to try to pick it up before the end of the year, we expect many of the proposals in this plan to be included in President Trump's fiscal year 2020 budget plan, his blueprint. So, but I think because the House being a Democratic majority now, I just don't think that there's going to be any interest in picking it up and moving it forward. So with that, the Older Americans Act is also coming up for reauthorization this year. Neil on our staff is in the process of engaging our membership to try to determine the positions we should take as an organization as the reauthorization approaches. So any of those of you on the call that are interested in this or are an area agency on aging, I recommend that you reach out to him and so he can include you on those conversations. So Neil did mention voter reform, so I won't say too much more, but something that was also mentioned that I think localities would find interesting is that they would like to establish automatic voter registration through that bill. So I thought that was interesting to bring up. And other things, of course, just rattle these off pretty rapid fire. Immigration has become a decisive topic, especially towards the end of this year and earlier this year, and I think it'll continue to be a talking point for the next Congress as well. Climate changes and extreme weather is becoming a bigger thing. Democrats are actually looking at reanimating the House Select Committee on Energy Dependence and Global Warming, and they're also planning joint hearings on climate change next year, so be sure to look for a lot of those conversations going on the Hill and maybe bills coming out as a result. The budget cap deal Eric mentioned, I think WOTUS, the waters of the U.S., is something that will probably come up as well. Many of you know the EPA is currently reviewing and rewriting that rule, but I imagine House Democrats will probably introduce a bill to keep the current rules, the 2015 rules in place. And I think that sums it up for me, but of course we're here if you have any questions. Neil and I will be glad to take them.
So we have one question. Are airports, I think this is for Neil, are airports, maritime ports, and IT networks like broadband and connected cities part of the infrastructure discussion?
My understanding is that the infrastructure discussion is very broad and does include those particular issues.
Yeah, I would say definitely broadband for sure too. I know that's something President Trump has even talked about in his last infrastructure proposal, just speaking on what I know. So I think that would be included in any infrastructure package coming up too.
And then on federal reorganization, what program was discussed being eliminated? I think CDBG.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned what that meant. It was the Community Development Block Grant Program. So it's something that Mick Mulvaney and the Office of Management and Budget has targeted for the last couple of years through the budget blueprints as zeroing out and getting rid of. They just see the program as being very repetitive and not producing a lot of success on the national level, although, you know, we've been going up to the Hill and trying to make sure that representatives know how important this program is to localities like you. And the good thing is that the people on the Hill, the staffers, are definitely getting that message, so I wouldn't worry too much about that program. There is a lot of bipartisan support in Congress.
And it looks like we don't have any more questions. I guess we'll give everyone one more minute. And just a reminder, to ask a question, just click the questions box in your toolbar. It looks like we don't have any more questions, so I will turn it over to Leslie Wallach.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Cameron. Eric, who's still not here, he's back at his conference, but Neil and Macy, thank you so much for all these updates, and thank you to you for joining us today. Want to remind you that we have recorded this session and it will be available on our website later today. We also encourage you to check in with the staff on this issue and other issues. As always, we will be following them, and we are here to answer your questions, to follow your lead, and to make sure to keep you informed on the issues we think we know should be important to you. Follow us on Twitter and sign up for our newsletters, and please make sure that you call us if for questions that you might have. Thanks again. We'll be following what's going on in the 116th Congress, and we will talk to you soon. See you in February. Thank you.
And we just got one last question about a summary of the session. The session will be available on NARC's YouTube channel and the website, and that will be sent to you all in a follow-up email.